Hello, Brad. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is my pleasure. Thank you. Yeah, as I was saying before we hit record, I wasn't quite sure when I made the ask if you would say yes, but it's a huge honor to have you here on the show. So, I normally ask my guests. I say, for people that don't know you, can you describe a little bit of your background? There's probably not that many people that don't know you. So, but for those that may not be in the NASCAR scene and all that, yeah, can you share a little bit about your background and yourself, please?
Yeah, so I come from a kind of a manufacturing family, so to speak. Right now I'm probably known as being the NASCAR race car driver, team owner, et cetera, which I take great pleasure in. I'm super proud of everything I've been able to do in NASCAR. But I also own a business outside of motorsports, which is Keselowski Advanced Manufacturing, very heavy into metal 3D printing, very heavy into CNC machining of additively manufactured parts and everything that goes with that. People always ask me, Brad, why are you doing that? And it really comes back to my background. Um,
Okay.
I'm from a family that could make anything. My dad and uncle, I grew up watching them build race cars. They kind of had the local speed shop, so to speak, in Michigan, just north of Detroit, a town called Rochester Hills is where I'm from. And close to that was where their shop was. And they were really the guys that you went to when you wanted to have a roll cage put in your drag car, or when you wanted somebody to fabricate a body for your race car. And my dad and uncle could just make anything. They're just amazing
Cool.
fabricators. Most of it by hand, some of it, using machinery.
Hmm.
For them, my grandfather, he was kind of I would call him a machinist, a master machinist. He
Nice.
kind of was notoriously known for, he was drafted into World War II, and they quickly figured out he was a machinist and said, "You ain't going, bud." And
Right.
back to run different machine shop ventures in the state of Michigan during World War II. So a lot of manufacturing in my blood.
Yeah, no kidding.
That
Very cool.
said, I was not nearly as good as those guys were. And I learned that at a very early age that I did not have the talent or the eye for making race cars and hand fabricating body parts and doing all those other things. But I did like computers, and I did
Hmm.
like working with all things digital. And so, it's very natural in family businesses for the sons to kind of pick up and do the things that maybe their fathers weren't great at, and gravitate away from the things that their
Hmm.
parents were good at in a family business, but in the same general consensus of
Sure.
manufacturing.
And
And
daughters
so
as well these days. Lots of
thought,
daughters getting into
well,
family
yeah, more
businesses.
on that
So,
later.
okay.
But my grandfather was good at machining,
Hmm.
so my uncle and father, they got really good at fabricating because even
Sure.
though my father could machine, he couldn't really fabricate,
Right.
and so they weren't great at machining. And so
Okay.
then behind them with, all right, I know these guys that are good at machining, I know these guys that are good at fabricating, but they're not really good at any of the digital stuff. I mean, CNC and process repeatability and all those things, that was like, whew, no time for
Right.
that. And so I spent a lot of time and focus on probably the different side of the business, which some would call the digital side, some would call the front office side. Now they all just go together.
Hmm.
Um, but back then, probably a little differently. And so that's really how my background got me into this business, among many other things. Like I said, my dad and uncle had a speed shop, race shop, as some people would call it. They built other people's cars, but they also built cars for themselves to compete with. And so I grew up in the race shop, but also at the racetrack, and
Hmm.
traveling with them from track to track. And I was always the little kid that said, I want to do that. I wanted to
Yeah.
drive a car. And next thing you know, the opportunities came my way, and I found myself climbing the ladder and eventually growing away from my family's business, and going into other businesses in motorsports. And that's really what got me here where I'm at today.
Very cool story. Yeah, I've gotten to meet some families that are in sort of the race car fabrication business, and their kids are got into go-karts and then sprint cars, and it's just it's fun. It's really really cool to see that. So yeah, so you have a successful NASCAR career. Then what made you decide you wanted to start CAM? And could you describe a little bit more what CAM looks like today and maybe your vision
Well,
for it?
I really fell in love with CNC machining in probably circa 2008, 2009.
Okay.
And I just loved the idea of high quality parts, super repeatable process. And so I had never really seen a high end machine shop until I went to Hendrick Motorsports, and I drove for
Mm.
them for about a year and a half through 2008, 2009. And the tour just blew me away. I mean, eyes like as big as they could get. And, they were making a lot of high end engine components there,
Mm-hmm.
but also a lot of chassis components for the race cars and so forth.
Sure.
So that really captivated me without a doubt. But I really didn't know what to do with that knowledge. What I started to figure out though is that made race cars go fast.
Mm-hmm.
Having the ability to make your own parts and have this really quick feedback loop that comes from in-house development and in-house capabilities. That was super interesting to me because I saw them parlay that into success on the racetrack. And then through the kind of the path of time, I went to other race teams and saw the same thing there. Probably the biggest example is I won the NASCAR championship in 2012,
Mm-hmm.
and a big part of the reason why I won it was because of our captive CNC shop.
Mm.
At that time, we were developing parts and iterating through them very quickly that controlled kind of how the car drove at an angle around the racetrack. It's called skew. So basically,
Okay.
the race car would drive at an angle around the racetrack, and the more angle you could get the car at, the faster it would go. And it took these really dynamic series of parts interacting together. And keyword there being dynamic in the sense that once you designed it, like it had to keep iterating week to week to week and really day by
Sure.
day by day. And I was in Texas for a race in 2012, fall of 2012, competing heavily for the championship. And we had this problem where the parts weren't working that controlled the dynamic skew of the car.
Mm.
And this happened at maybe Saturday of a race weekend, and we were in practice trim, and we realized that the parts being dynamic were not really designed for the weather and conditions that we had. They were designed for probably a 70 or 80-degree day, and it was really cold in Texas that particular year. And with the track being too cold, the car was traveling and acting differently than our modeling of the parts had predicted. And they really just weren't optimized. So
Mm.
we'd figured all this out by about 11 a.m. that Saturday, maybe noon that Saturday. And we called our machine shop and said, hey, we need to reconfigure these parts and we need them in Texas tomorrow. Keep in mind, our shop was North Carolina. So it's kind of like the ultimate
Sure.
machine shop challenge. I'm going to give
Yeah.
you roughly 16 hours to redesign, manufacture, inspect, and deliver this part.
Sure.
And it was a 5-axis CNC part, so not the easiest part in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, it was out of aluminum, but our team at that time was with Team Penske, was able to reconfigure the part, so redo the CAD, redo the cam, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and manufacture the part, inspect the part, and deliver it to another state in 16 hours. So when you think about the ultimate machine shop challenge, that was it.
No kidding.
Both,
Wow.
and it was successful, and we went out and had a great day on the racetrack, and it propelled me forward to the championship. So if ever there was a success story like
Yeah.
of CNC machining, especially
And the
captive machining,
and
this
the
was
teamwork that goes with it. Yeah.
absolute.
Everyone. Wow.
So from problem statement to delivery, 16 hours. A lot of people came together to make that happen. I was really, really proud of it, and that was the power of really the culture that we have in motorsports. And so I was really just amazed by that culture. And you think about that culture and say, how do I take that culture to other industries that have similar challenges?
Mm-hmm.
And that in itself got me thinking a lot, Paul, about CNC manufacturing, but not enough to make me a mover to adopt the technology for my own personal business.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward the timeline a little bit, about 5 years later on, I started to see metal 3D printed parts make their way through motorsports.
Mm-hmm.
And these parts were printed in metal printers. and then machined in machine shops. And they had a lot of advantages, specifically lightweighting for motorsports.
Mm-hmm.
Which, of course, the lighter you can make the race car, the better. You have to
Yeah.
add the weight back, but you can put it in more
Put it
advantageous
in the right spot you want. Yeah.
right spot.
Reduce
Yes.
unsprung weight. Yeah.
Unsprung weight is bad. Rotating weight is bad. Weight on the right side of the car, generally bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so placement of weight is really critical. So we make a lot of really cool lightweight parts to go on our race cars, only to add that weight back in other areas, which can be
But
a little
still, it's a speed advantage.
still an advantage, right?
Yeah.
We're only looking for fractions, so every little bit counts. And you know, the ultimate story in that is for motorsports, we value weight as being worth somewhere between $2,000 to $5,000 a pound. Meaning, for every pound we're able to save, we're willing to spend incrementally somewhere between $2,500 to $5,000 a part. So, or a pound per
Interesting.
part. So,
Yeah.
you know, from a value perspective, that's a lot of value for us. It
Sure.
shows to us. And other industries, I know the numbers higher, but that's where we're at with motorsports. So, carrying that story forward, added parts, lighter, saving a little bit of weight, willing to spend a little more, except there's a problem. There's no real quality supply chain for these parts.
Mm-hmm.
And that became my probably point of movement. I'm sure there's a fancier word for that than a point of movement. But uh, that said, I like CNC machining. I like metal 3D printing. Don't see this culture anywhere. Don't see this supply chain anywhere, at least not in a combined nature.
Right.
I just felt compelled to do something. Um, and so this was permeating through my head through the 2017 calendar year. And then I ran into a friend of mine who actually had worked in the motorsports industry for a team that I was on and had moved and started his own shop in carbon composites.
Oh,
And
cool.
I saw him at a conference and he just generally asked him, "Hey, how are you doing?" His name was Joe Hoffman. "How are you doing, Joe? How's business?" And he's good, good, good. And I asked him, "Well, I got to ask, it's been a couple of years since you left motorsports to start your own business. Any regrets?" And he looked at me, Paul, and said, "I just got one." I said, "Yeah, what's that?" "I should have done metal 3D printing, not carbon." Like, oh, now I got to do this. So that's when I made the decision. So I took one
Mm-hmm.
of my other businesses. I had a race team that competed in NASCAR's third tier series, which was the truck series, and said, "All right, I'm going to shutter this business. I'm going to take all the assets and facilities and some of the personnel, the human capital, and I'm going to reapply it over to metal 3D printing of finished parts. So
Right.
that they're CNC machined.
Sure.
Not just CNC machines, some of them are anodizing, brazings, or anodizing and weldments and other things that go together. But for the most part, finished 3D printed parts through CNC machining. And out of that, CAM was born. We took the year of 2018 to convert the facilities, convert the people, train the workforce, bring in all the machinery, and launched in 2019. So that's the story of our launch.
Wow. What a cool story. Um, yeah, I can appreciate the notion of the and you mentioned weight being huge, but I imagine speed was
Mm,
also a big advantage in additive, right? You can
yeah.
go from your design, send it to a printer, and
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, the speed part of additive is good. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of people get hung up on that. I don't really get hung up on the speed part of 3D printing for good or bad.
okay, yeah,
Some people are hung up on it with, "Oh man, it takes too long to print one part. I could CNC machine that." I'm really more captivated by the applications than I
mm,
am the speed.
right,
Um, Specifically at CAM, we make parts that you can't make any other way.
yeah,
Very rarely, but it does happen sometimes. Do we make parts that you can make another way? Sometimes we
hmm,
make parts that are replacements to castings, but generally not. The
hmm,
only real business that we make parts that we're competitive to is generally brazings.
hmm,
The rest of it, we really don't compete against traditional CNC machining. Our part family is not really in that realm.
right. Well, I think some of that thinking comes from people that um, they have parts that were designed for CNC machining, and they
A
say,
lot.
"Well, what if we try to print this?" But if it's designed for printing, it opens up a world of options in terms of design, strength, lightweight, all those kinds of things. So
Yeah, it's critical for our parts success. And I'm kind of trailing off here a little bit, but it's critical for our parts success and ultimately our customers' success, for those parts to really be thought of from an additive value perspective at day one. If you're just looking to replace a CNC part, we're not the right answer. So
sure.
Cam acts really as a contract manufacturer. So
Hmm.
we contract manufacture additive parts that are CNC machined and finished and inspected, and all the way through an AS9100 system. And so in that regard, we see a lot of success stories, and we see stories that aren't successful. And I can almost guarantee any part that's brought in to be a replacement for a CNC part is going to be a failure.
Right.
If there's no value to printing it, we tell our customer right off the front end, look, we would gladly take this work and do it for you. Ultimately, we don't want to.
Hmm.
And the reason why we don't want to do it, Paul, is we know what will inevitably happen is that customer will take that part, they'll get it, and they might love it short term, but they're eventually not going to like it. They're going to find something they don't like, and costing or deliverability or scalability. And ultimately,
Sure.
they're going to label the technology that way.
Right.
Um, and so we tend not to build those types of parts. And we actually, more often than not, no quote those parts and say, come back to us when you have an application that our technology makes sense for. We'd rather wait for you to have the right application than just make the part for you and kind of ruin your additive experience from the get go.
I can appreciate that. I like the long-term outlook there. That's good. So what does Cam look like today in terms of how many machines and folks?
Well, we have a lot of equipment. We have we're over 20 printers now, almost 20 CNC machines. We consider ourselves a print first company, which basically means if we don't print it, we try not to be involved in the manufacturing process.
Hmm.
Occasionally, we'll have parts where somebody else has printed and we'll machine them for them because our CNC shop is really a additive dedicated CNC shop.
Right.
And why that's important is the equipment and the culture to be good at machining additive parts is vastly different than a traditional CNC shop. From the way you handle work holding to the way you handle your scheduling of your people, the type of caliber people that you have on the floor, we aren't even competitive in our shop when it
Sure.
comes to traditional CNC work because every machine has the most qualified operator. We don't have any low labor people on our floor because our parts are too expensive
Hmm.
and we can't afford to scrap them.
Yeah.
We have parts that hit our machines, Paul, that when they hit the CNC machine, they're already worth $40,000 or $50,000 before they've even loaded into the machine.
Per piece.
Yes, per piece. So
Wow.
like we need to be really careful who's machining them. Like we're not just pulling the first year CNC guy off the floor, right?
Sure.
They got to be indicated in perfectly. And every tool needs to be executed perfectly. There's no room for error. And so
Hmm.
it's a different culture. If you watch our shop, even our high production jobs, generally our CNC machines have very low utilization, especially during the day. Most of
Hmm.
our days are spent indicating parts in and dialing them in precisely, verifying tool paths, verifying tools to every level of degree, running simulation on our CNC of parts.
Right.
So we're a different type of shop than most people. In fact, than anyone I've ever ran into. And
Hmm.
that's okay because it's what we need to be able to do to really machine additive parts. So if you walked into our shop today, what you would see is 20 some printers, almost 20 some CNC machines. Most of the CNC machines idle because they run generally during the night after we've completely validated our parts, indicated them, validated our programs, validated our tooling.
Hmm.
You'd see printers that are running
Hmm.
unattended. You'll
Yep.
see cameras on every piece of equipment. You'll see that we're an ITAR facility, so you won't see anybody on their phones.
Yep.
You see that we're a digital factory, and you won't find paper anywhere in our factory. You'll see a robust quality system in our factory. Specifically, you go through our quality department, you'll see X-rays, you'll see or X-ray scanners, CT scanner, digital radiography. You'll see a lot of CMMs. You'll see a lot of optical comparators. We take quality very, very seriously because we're working on super expensive parts that require that. Most of our parts that you'll see on our floor will be aerospace parts. Many of them will be ITAR restricted. We're an ITAR level facility, so you won't see any cell phones. You won't
Yep.
see any of the things that could potentially leak out those parts. So
Yep.
that's generally what you would see in our factory, Paul.
Okay. And is it aerospace as in commercial or more defense or even space, like going into space types of parts, or all the above?
About 80% of our parts are ITAR related. The majority are aerospace ITAR,
Hmm. Hmm.
uh, specific to launch. Some of it's commercial, some of it's defense related launch.
Hmm.
Um, Sometimes we know, sometimes we don't know what our applications do.
Sure.
Nature of working in defense. Sometimes I'm not sure we want to know, but a lot of launch related components, which is super exciting to us. We consider ourselves an enabler of commercial space, but that's not all we do. We do have some traditional DoD. We do have a little bit of automotive that's not DoD related, but mostly we're 80% ITAR work, aerospace.
And how did you decide that that was going to be your niche as opposed to
Mhm.
serving race car customers?
Yeah,
Or
a
yeah,
lot of people, Paul, think we do motorsports, which
right.
I can reference, but we do very little motorsports. Really, the market found me
Okay.
very early on in our business. We launched in 2019, very early on. The launch companies, aerospace companies, started reaching out to us and saying, "Hey, we'd like you to try our parts, and we need you. We need somebody who can make good parts fast." So,
Hmm.
okay, we'll give it a shot. And we went off to the races. Pardon my pun, and got to work, and we started to make inroads very quickly in the launch industry, and I would say most of that is because the launch industry is the most advanced in their understanding of additive parts and the most advanced in with respect to needing quantities of those parts made.
How did they first find out about you in the first place when you opened in 2019? What kind of marketing did you do? What did you do to get the word out?
Most of our company's success has been through LinkedIn, a little bit with Instagram and Twitter and those things, but LinkedIn, and then making parts for a few select companies. And then those people move to other companies and kind of organically spread the word, which has been most of our marketing success.
Yeah, the movement of engineers and buyers between companies is always a wonderful thing if you're a good
Yes.
supplier that they trust and love. Sorry, the train is very loud going by.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
Tell me,
our best marketing. Our best marketing at CAM is a happy customer that switches a job. And and so we have this conversation all the time about the type of work we do. What shouldn't we do? We can't be everything to everyone. And we always check that with that you just don't know where this person's going to go next. We get a lot of calls from research laboratories who will say to us, "Hey, can you make us one of these?" And inevitably we'll have somebody in our shop floor that's like, "Man, this is a terrible part, and we're only making one of them, and it's hard to make." And like, yeah, but that guy might go work somewhere another day and say, "You will not believe this cool part I had made at this company in North Carolina called Cam." And next thing you know, word of mouth, here we are with a bigger job.
yeah, fantastic. Um, so you mentioned having highly skilled machinists, and every shop I know these days is having a hard time finding folks like that. How do you
Mm,
go about hiring and recruiting and retaining, top level talent?
it's super challenging. Paul, there's no easy answer. Probably the thing that works best for us, in my opinion at least, is that we have a lot of high end machinists and high end equipment. We fancy ourselves as having the best of the best in both people and equipment. And generally, it's been my experience that the best want to be surrounded with the best. Meaning that when people walk into our floor and they see that we have a really nice factory, we have really nice equipment with really good machinists, they gravitate towards that and say, "I want to work with, I want that to be my coworker. And I
Hmm.
want to work on that factory floor where it's clean and it's organized and it has a system that's, advanced with operations and MES and ERP." And I think that's probably served us as well or better than anything else. Is I call ourselves the Marines of additive and CNC,
Hmm.
meaning we want the best and nothing but the best. And
Right.
if you're not the best, you probably won't last here. And that can be really tough. We have people that come in and think they're really good, and then they spend a couple of weeks here and they go, "Ugh." In Navy SEALs terms, they ring the bell,
Right.
and that's
So do they,
frustrating.
so are they opting out, or is your team saying you're not cut out for
More often
this environment?
out.
Mm.
What a lot of people tell us is, "Hey, I knew this was going to be hard, but I've never seen parts like this before, and these are the hardest parts I've ever seen. These parts are crazy."
Hmm.
And we get people that do that in the interview process. And we'll walk to the floor and say, these are the craziest parts I've ever seen, and I can't do this. I'm out.
Right.
Um, so we're glad, by the way, when that happens. I'd rather somebody tell
Yes.
my hand than a couple of weeks in. But the analogy is we are the Marines of CNC, meaning we make the toughest parts.
Hmm.
We make the parts that nobody else wants to touch, uh, in the sense that generally they're additively printed with very complex structures, shapes, which makes them incredibly difficult to fixture and to hold.
Hmm.
As you can probably imagine, like we're not starting from a block of anything ever.
Right. Sure.
So we have huge fixturing challenges. Uh, by the nature of the parts we make, they're fairly advanced. So usually have very tight tolerances. One of the key benefits of additive is you can print some really exotic materials. So guess what? They generally cut very poorly.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, all these things combined, a lot of indicating naturally as well, best fit scenarios, kind of like a casting. All these things combined that our parts are very difficult. Finding people is very difficult. But we put it right out there and say, hey, we want the best machinists. If you're the best machinist and you want to work on the toughest parts with the best equipment, we're your place. If you're not, we're not your place. Please don't apply. Don't waste your time or ours.
Hmm.
And so in marine fashion, I think that's kind of their motto is we want the best. And are you cut out for this or are you not?
Right. And do you recruit on LinkedIn as well, or traditional channels like Indeed and stuff like that?
We recruit across multiple suites of social media channels and so forth. But generally, again, I find most of our success with customers and future employees is through LinkedIn.
Right. Very good. So you've gone basically from starting a company in 2019 to in 2022 today, having close to 40 pieces of equipment. That's rapid growth. What
Yeah,
challenges have you faced trying to grow that quickly?
process control every day. Process control, education of workforce around process control. We're always adding a new layer to our process control in some way. Either it's refining a process, adding a new one, every day. Process control, process control, process control. We're an AS9100 company, and in a lot of ways, you would say, "Oh, well, as soon as you get that certificate, you're fine." Nope, no, you're not. Like you've got to work it and you've got to live it every day. And process control in the planning stage of, hey, what is the risk associated with making this part? How do we build out a process control document on the front end that fully encapsulates it and de-risks it?
Mhm.
And then you put it out on the floor and you see if it worked or not. You put your smartest people behind it. And there's always a revision, always an iteration. As soon as you feel like you've got a part perfect, something pops up and you go, oh, we
Right.
didn't we didn't have this thought out. Our parts are very difficult that way. And any small failure in process control is almost always a failure in the manufacturing of our parts.
And did you learn that philosophy of process control on the racetrack?
A lot of it through motorsports, absolutely. Motorsports, if a part breaks, somebody can die.
Mhm.
Um, that said, motorsports does not have the level of process control that aerospace does. And aerospace deserves a lot of credit for that. But it does have the criticality in the parts nature and construction.
Right. Yeah, I have to believe that um, running a race team at that highest caliber, you're never going to be successful unless there's a reasonable number of well-defined processes and quality built in and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But at aerospace, it's even higher, huh?
Yes.
It's even
Yep.
higher yet.
Welcoming.
Yeah. Um, what? are the biggest challenges that you guys are facing today in your shop?
Besides process control,
And
um,
just continuing optimizing. I mean, so when you do have a failure, you do you do sort of just a root cause analysis and then try
yeah,
to figure
yeah. I
out the
mean,
most optimal process to improve it?
definitely corrective actions.
Yep.
Uh, which is at the heart of AS 9100 is, hey, are we ticketing these items and correcting them every day?
Mhm.
And kind of running through a 5 whys exercise, right? Why is this happening? And work your way through it. 5 whys isn't perfect, but it's a good start. Um, and there's almost always a new one every day. There's a scrap part almost every day, which hurts. They're expensive
Mhm.
parts. And there's a critical lesson. I could tell I was on the factory floor today and walking it before the podcast, and we had a part that we've probably made 100 of, and we had a new failure on it, and said, "How did this happen?" And tracked down the root cause, and found it was a filter that was clogging and was making its way into the coolant. We were having intermittent coolant issues that we weren't capturing, and said, "All right, well, how is this filter clogging?" Well, we have it scheduled as weekly maintenance, and every other part we manufacture, that's not an issue. Weekly maintenance is plenty good on that filter for the coolant supply. But this part, something about its chips and the way it's contaminating the filters for the coolant is causing failures every other part. So now you go back to process control and say, all right, for this part in this process, we need to clean the machine after every part, which is
Right.
tedious, um, but it's the key learning in it. But if you don't apply it, you'll never get to production control.
Mm, that's interesting. Yeah, I can imagine something about the yeah, the chips being really fine and clogging the filter faster than normal chips do
Yeah, which is a
would cause,
combination additive.
right, especially on
Doing
those hard metals, you're doing really small.
small cuts on hard metals, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating. So besides process control, what are the other challenges you're facing today?
Workforce education. No,
Education. Okay.
workforce education. Um, Finding talent to run our equipment. I would say the biggest one for me, Paul, is having people that truly understand GD&T. And we do GD&T training in our facility, but most people don't truly understand GD&T. I'm not an expert either, Paul, to be
Sure.
honest. Uh, but when people pull up the drawing and they read something, do they really understand what it means? And our parts have rather complicated callouts in them, and tolerances and profiles and all the key things. And we need our people to be able to read them and understand them right away so they understand the risk of making a part. If we have to explain the GD&Ts to it, it's probably too late.
Right. Well, I'm sure you also realize you run into drawings and customers where the engineers don't really understand GD&T that well themselves, and they apply it to drawings somewhat willy nilly. And
All the time, which is another reason why we need our entire company to be proficient in GD&T.
right.
Um, it really, even at the quoting level, is probably where it's
Mhm.
the most important,
Oh, sure. Yeah. I can imagine.
because that's when you find problems with your customers' parts, or where you ideally where you would like to find problems with your customers' parts, so that we can correct them before we've taken the job, so that we truly understand the risk of the part. And I would say a lot, and I would say over 50% of the parts that we manufacture, we will find an issue with the customer's drawing.
Mhm.
And it's just a question of when we find it. Do
Right.
we find it at the front end, or do we find it at the back end? It's the most painful when you find it at the back end. When somebody in quality is raising their hand and going, "Hey, wait a minute. I went to measure this part, and that doesn't work." you know,
Yes.
that's when you're like, "Oh God, I've just made these parts. I have all this money in them." And
Right.
there's a good chance that the customer is going to see this and say, "Yeah, I can't take this part. I screwed up, but you guys are going to eat it."
Right.
Those are the ones that are really painful.
Yes. Yes. I've been there.
Yeah,
We
early as you can.
we Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, and so this actually gets to the point I was just about to make. In our own shop, we ended up putting on training classes for the engineers at our customers.
Yes.
and publishing design for manufacturability newsletters. And I know some of my listeners have heard this before, but we would for some of our biggest, most key customers, we would send someone to be on site in their engineering teams, with office hours every
Yeah.
week. We'd just be there and be there as a resource to have them bounce ideas off us. And what about this drawing? And I'm thinking about specking it this way. And how does that, and we'd just be upfront and honest about, yeah, this would be easy. What if you change that a little bit? That could make, that cut a bunch of cost out or complexity. So,
All the time we have those conversations with our customers. Did you really mean this?
right.
You have a tolerance that's going to be incredibly difficult to hit, even if this
Yeah.
was and it's not aluminum. It's a
Right.
very exotic and hard to cut metal. Are you sure you need that tolerance?
Sure.
Well, no, we just put it on there. And all right, let's think about that. It's
Yes.
a lot of cost. We're probably going to scrap a number of parts to get this, and your
Mm-hmm.
lead time just went exponentially through the roof. Are
Right.
you sure you want this? And if the answer is yes, then we're going to do the best we can for you. More
Yeah.
often than the answer is no, or their answer is I didn't think about that part of it.
Yeah.
And so that's our job as a company. But if you don't understand GD&T at a very proficient level
Mm-hmm.
in all aspects of your company, you're going to get in a lot of trouble with those types of parts.
Yeah. And how do you train your staff? Do you have classes during lunch hours, or what do you? Yeah, is it
Uh,
asynchronous?
Very fortunate that in the state of North Carolina, there's a lot of grants available for training,
Mm-hmm.
and we use every one of them we can, which can be painful sometimes because you'll train all your employees, and then somebody else offers more money. You're like, ah, because we're really paying them to learn.
Sure.
When we'll do a lot of lunch and learns, so at least once a month there'll be a lunch and learn where someone will come in and they'll try to teach GD&T, for example, or it could be something else. Could be programming or a number of key functions, and then we'll pay those employees through that hour or two, maybe even full day worth of classes. Then you just cross your fingers and say, please stay with the company. Like, we just spent a lot of money training you. Even though we got the grant for the class, we're paying you hours to learn. So that can be painful, but for the most part, we just dedicate time, usually monthly, for training, at the very least quarterly.
Right. So that opens up a great question. How do you create a culture that people want to stay at and they don't want to move for a buck or two because they just love working for you?
Well, there's a couple key aspects. Some that I like, some that I don't like, Paul. Uh, Probably number one is an environment that obviously it doesn't have harassment or it doesn't accept that type of culture,
Mm-hmm.
which seems easy, but in practice, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
There's always, issues. If you have people and you have employees, you will have problems with this. I promise you.
Yeah.
But kind of having a low tolerance for that. The other aspect that I take a lot of pride in is we have an incredibly clean facility with state of the art equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people like working on that type of equipment. And they like
Mm-hmm.
being able to go to work and walk through the factory floor and not get dirty. They appreciate that. They appreciate a facility that's climate controlled, or that the lights are all working and it's dark in areas they want to be dark and bright in areas they want to be bright.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that helps. Probably the more difficult side for me, which I really had a hard time accepting, is not rehiring people that have left your company, uh, which is hurtful for me personally. But it actually is really, really important. I made this mistake. We had an issue, especially early on with our company, where people would leave very often for a job that might pay a couple dollars an hour more, or a couple $1,000 more a year salary. And we would say, hey, if it doesn't work out, we'd love to have you back. And what that really enabled was a culture where people were just constantly leaving, saying, ooh, what if I go somewhere else that has just a little bit more money and it's good like this? I'll have the best of all worlds. And so we were just turning over people all the time. It was not working at all.
Right.
And those people would come back and we'd rehire them, and then they'd leave again 6 months later. And you're like, this is killing us. Like, we can't get any continuity to our workforce.
Mm-hmm.
And so, somewhat regrettably, but it was important to our culture, is we got into a spot where we say, hey, look, if somebody quits, we can't rehire you. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we want you, if this is what you want to do, go ahead. We're going to treat you as fairly as we can here while you work here. Whether that's salary or, other benefits, bonuses, family time, etc. But if you leave, that's it. Like, we're
Mm-hmm.
not we're not coming back.
Sure.
And so that was hard for me to accept, because I wanted people to be able to go out and take opportunities, and wanted to be there for them. But if it didn't work out, but also it couldn't be at the expense of everyone else in the company.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately it was hurting everybody else in the company. So I have this standing rule when it comes to employees, when it comes to customers, which is, I don't want to be taking advantage of my customers or our people. And I don't want my customers or our people to take advantage of me. And when I view it through that lens, every decision is made. And the personnel one, we had to go to the not rehiring people who had left our company. And that did more to maintain the culture of our company than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I know some shops, or especially areas where you have just a high concentration of shops. It's easy to bounce around because everyone is in high demand right now. So.
And it's frustrating for me, Paul, just take off my business owner hat. It's frustrating for me as someone who loves to see people develop,
Mm-hmm.
because more often than not, that actually hurts people in their development. And it's very common in this particular industry, manufacturing industry, for people to bounce around a lot, especially CNC machining.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been my experience, especially with younger CNC machinists, that it's one of the worst things you can do, because you move before you really get good at something. And if you're in the right work environment, you're going to naturally get exposure to a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's job shops that clearly aren't that way, so don't take
Right.
this the right way. But
Yeah.
the majority of the shops that I see, you'll get the opportunity to grow through the company and to become a master at everything, step by step by step. But a lot of times I'll see young people, especially, that will move very quickly through their career. And every young CNC machinist, I feel like, wants to be a programmer. And my advice to them is, slow down. You're not going to be a programmer in 2 years. I understand that the technical schools have told you that. That's probably not right. And if you do somehow get to a company that will allow you to be a programmer in 2 years, you're going to fail miserably, because you really don't understand the manufacturing process. You haven't really become a master at anything. And you really can't effectively program what you don't understand how to machine. And so become a master at that and work your way into programming. I understand you want to get behind the computer desk. It's a nice place to work. It pays more money. But if you do this the wrong way, you're just going to keep job hopping. And anytime there's an economic downturn, you'll be the first person to get cut.
Mm-hmm.
So please slow down and
Right.
work your way through it. Become a master at something so that wherever you're going, it'll stick.
That's good advice. You mentioned not taking advantage of anyone, customers, employees, vice versa. Do you have core values that you have
Oh,
established in the company?
in fact, we work on them almost every year. In fact, it's funny you bring this up, Paul. I didn't know you were going to ask this question, but I have a sheet in my car outside. Otherwise, I would show it to you, where we're literally going through and reevaluating our core values. So our core values of our company we set 3 years ago, and when we founded it, and we said, hey, we're a different company now than we were 3 years ago. We've matured, understand this industry better. What do we want them to be? And I'm on like version 4 of our new values, but a lot of them are around accountability,
Mm-hmm.
self accountability, accountability to your teammate,
Mm-hmm.
over delivering for our customer with that, culture of, or mentality, culture of, hey, does this really work for the customer, or is this just what's best for me?
Right.
Which is critical in our nature, or a company of our nature, which is in contract manufacturing. Of course, we have safety, core values. Everybody should go home the same way they came here every day. We shouldn't be taking chances. We shouldn't be exposing yourselves to any risk of injury, short or long term. And if you are, you should be telling your supervisor immediately so we can fix that. We don't. You don't have to be unsafe to make our parts. It's not a requirement. And anyone in our company that says that you do, stop right now. So we work really hard on I guess, long story short, we work really hard on refining our core values, and it's just something we think is super important.
How do you communicate them to your team? Are they posted on the walls? Do you talk about them in team meetings? Do you recognize people for those values when they do?
3 P's: practice, preach, promote. If you're not doing all 3 of the P's, your core values mean nothing. So preach obviously is company top level down of, hey, this is what we think matters. It's just similar to what I just did with you, although I didn't have it fully articulated. Apologies for that. And then practicing is, all right, are we actually doing them? Not just our people on the floor, but across the entire company. And then promoting. Promoting, not just the sense of, hey, we're going to pay you more money or you get a bigger title. Promoting can be more than that. Promoting can be, hey, you get the best parking spot. Promoting can be, hey, you get a $50 gift card, or hey, you get a trophy, or hey, you get an extra day of PTO. Some sort of recognition and promotion. So those 3 P's, super critical to me. And you pull off any one of those 3, and you're not really, you don't really effectively have company values. So I'm big on that. Preach, practice, promote.
I like that. Yeah, in our company, we have this gift card program where employees can share gift cards with other teammates, but we always ask them to highlight the core value that they're recognizing them for. And it just reinforces that, and we get to see those going back and forth with our employees, and it's really wonderful.
Yeah, we have little trophies, right? This tall,
nice.
And we do quarterly awards. Employees allowed to keep that trophy that they've won in their workspace for the quarter, because I think it's probably around racing heritage. Everybody likes a trophy.
Sure.
Especially with your name on it, and the trophies rotate every quarter. And then on top of the trophy, which has somehow become the biggest hit, is a bowl full of candy, which brings everybody to the trophy winners workspace because they want a piece of candy. It becomes an extra way to get recognized, and then that particular person gets gift cards. So that's at the moment.
That's a great practice. That's fantastic. What metrics do you track in the company to make sure things are? I mean, there's the obvious ones like quality and delivery, but are there others that maybe are a little bit more obscure that are really important to you guys?
My 3 most important metrics is our weekly burn rate. I track that every week on an 8-week rolling average, because you'll have, dips and dives, and that's normal, peaks and valleys, I guess you'd say. So I track 3 things every week personally: weekly cash burn, weekly sales, and then weekly shipments, deliveries. There's a different term for it. And that's the heartbeat of the company for me, is those 3 lines. I kind of look at them like if I was sitting at a hospital and watching the little monitor with the heartbeat. That's the heartbeat of the company. And our goal is always to have our weekly burden below our sales and our ops burn, or our shipments.
Right.
Doesn't always happen. In fact, a lot of times it doesn't happen, which is why I pull it in an 8-week average, because that aggregates it in a way that is fair to a business of our nature. So this is what I track as the most critical nature. Our company, especially our quality team, on-time delivery, super important. Of course, scrap, super important. First pass yield, super important. Most of your traditional machining metrics hold true to additive in that sense.
Okay. And on the additive side, can you describe a little bit about the types of machines, sizes, and sort of how you've evolved your thinking about what you need for the future?
Well, on the additive side, we have medium and large format machinery.
Okay.
Medium and additive is generally around 280 millimeters cubed. Large and additive is generally anything over 400 millimeters cubed.
Hmm.
So we have a good mix of that equipment on our shop floor, and we got there, sometimes through the hard way. We tried a number of different vendors without naming names, and eventually settled on the majority of our equipment in additive being EOS, and the majority of our equipment in subtractive being Mazak equipment.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Nice machines.
Thank
Um, you mentioned obviously your ITAR, um, defense and space work. What are you doing about cybersecurity, particularly in light of the CMMC standard coming very hard and fast?
Yeah, we're trying really hard to play in front of CMMC, Paul. It's difficult because it's moving a lot and it isn't settled. But from what we understand of it, at least, we've done a lot of different initiatives to make sure we're compliant, to NIST as well, which is a little bit of a precursor. But it's I talked a little bit about one of the things we've done. We don't have company, or we don't have personal cell phones in our facility anymore, so we locked those out. Everyone's allowed a company phone, which is controlled. Cameras are effectively deactivated,
Mm-hmm.
Bluetooth deactivated, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So that was important for us. We went through every camera in our building to make sure it was to standards, effectively made in America. So we didn't have to worry about them being hacked. Of course, physically, our entrance is ITAR compliant and
Right.
security enabled to where we can really gatekeep who comes in and out of our building. And speaking of gates, our building is completely encapsulated and fenced in physically as well. So from a server's perspective, we have all of our own internal servers that are fully secured, not just digitally, but physically as well. And a plethora of other pieces with IT to make sure we're compliant all the time.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's necessary. It's good that you're being proactive. It's talked to many shops that don't have it quite as much on their radar as they need to, given the industries that they serve.
And we also probably most critically do weekly, or not weekly, monthly cyber training for every employee is mandatory.
Oh.
So we try to keep it simple. It's somewhere between 5 to 15 minutes every week cyber training, or every month cyber training,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is part of our plan to stay safe.
Do you do phishing campaigns yourself, where you send
We have,
fake?
yeah,
Yeah.
given away too much stuff, but we have a few active campaigns.
Yeah. I think that's smart for any company to be could be doing, because humans are the number one weakest link
Mhm.
in this whole system.
Always.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously you've gone, really deep in additive and this hybrid model. How do you think the whole concept of additive will shape the machining industry going, and 5, 10, 20 years down the road?
Very little. I don't see additive shaping CNC machine. I see them as non-competing technologies.
Okay.
There's a lot of people that think they're competing. I see CNC guys all the time that tell me this additive stuff is terrible. It's never going to work. I'm like, no, no, it is. It's just not going to replace you.
Right.
And then I see additive guys all the time. Oh yeah, we're going to replace CNC machine. No, nope, no, you're not. They're not competing technologies. They're complementary technologies. Um, Additive can make parts that CNC machining can't make. CNC machining can make parts much quicker, faster, cost efficiently, effectively, and efficiently than additive ever will. Uh, Really, the combination of the two is what's powerful, because CNC machining specifically can produce tighter tolerances and better feature resolution than additive can. And so we really look at the two as not competing technologies, but like I said, technologies that really lift each other up and make both better. But for additive specific, or CNC specifically, I don't see where additive does much for CNC technology as far as how it will improve it. Um, but I do see all the time where CNC technology improves additive technology, specifically machine construction and best practices.
Mm. Mhm. I like that perspective, and I definitely can see um, both sides of the arguments, but um, but that they really are complementary because there's, like you said, the types of parts that they're really great at, they're just different, right? There's parts, and and I still believe. Well, do you think that it'd be prudent for shops to start looking at adding additive
No,
capabilities? If no, okay,
not at all. If you're a CNC shop right now and you're looking at added metal 3D printing, not plastic, key here
right,
is 3D
yeah,
printing, I would tell you right now, stop.
hmm,
It's a terrible idea. It will completely change your work culture on your floor to be successful. It'll task it in ways that you're probably not going to be comfortable with. If you're a high volume CNC shop, low mix, high mix,
hmm.
if you're anything high volume CNC, additive manufacturing is the worst technology you could add to your equipment, your
Sure,
portfolio, because the work culture to be successful is different. The work culture requires being okay with like machines, CNC machines specifically that aren't running during the day.
right,
And that's a whole different culture. It requires being okay with having an $80,000 part in your machine and knowing that if you cut it, you're starting over and you're
hmm,
taking all of that risk. Um, so it also requires a completely different level of commitment to FOD and process control that really doesn't work in most standard CNC shops.
hmm,
So my advice to me would be is stop. Now, if you want to
yeah,
have plastic printing, I think plastic printing should be in every CNC shop. The ability to do fixturing and not just for the machine process, but mostly for the inspection process
inspection, yeah,
is critical in nature. We use it all the time. We don't make plastic parts, but we make a lot of plastic fixtures in our shop.
right, yeah.
But metal 3D printing in a traditional CNC shop, terrible idea in most cases.
Yeah, very interesting advice. Yeah, no, I could see that being so different, especially if they're higher volume and that's their mentality, and major cultural shifts.
Yeah, and it will ruin your work culture for CNC. To try to be good, you cannot be good at both, in my opinion.
Mm,
It's just two completely different cultures.
right. Yeah. Super interesting. I'm wondering as we just starting to wrap up here. Obviously, growing a company from from scratch to, and I don't know how many folks you have on your team, but a lot to support 40 machines. What's
Yeah,
that?
just
Wow.
just
In 3 years has got to be pretty intense. What are some of the most memorable experiences you've had in the last 3 years?
high production runs of space parts. Watching them uh, run, watching them, launch.
Hmm.
That's in the world to me. And knowing that we're making parts that nobody else has made before
Right.
that will change our future as a society, that just blows me away every day.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Those. There's obviously more and more launches happening all the time. It's almost not even news anymore,
It
but
is.
it's remarkable the shift. But I have a friend in the industry whose daughter went up to the space station earlier this year and lived on it for 6 months, and I know he was nervous when she was on that
Oh,
rocket.
I bet.
And knowing that there's critical parts like you guys make and others in the industry make is so important and drives home why quality is so important and excellence is so important.
Every part we make, I strive to make sure we make it like it was going on my race car, and that if it failed, I would get hurt. And I carry that same philosophy to our customer parts.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Brad, if people want to reach out to Cam and learn more about what you guys are doing, what would you suggest they do?
Oh, all the time email info@camsolutions.com. It's always the best way to get a hold of us. It's constantly monitored by our team here from
Right,
ops to sales and customer relationships. And if there's ever any question that someone has for us, I'd encourage them strongly to email us. Now, of course, you can also see our websites and social media at camsolutions.com. And of course, follow us on LinkedIn, like we talked about.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Brad, thank you so much for this time today. It's a pleasure to get to sit down and chat with you. Appreciate your perspective on the industry. I definitely learned some stuff as well. And keep doing the great job you guys are doing there.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate you.
All right. Take care. Have a good day.
Take care.